Usually, when you hear about the massive boom in artificial intelligence or, cloud computing, you think about software.
Right, yeah. You think about code. Or maybe those microscopic silicon chips.
Exactly. The imagery we're constantly fed is just very ethereal. Like, it's called the cloud. It sounds totally weightless, totally invisible.
But the reality of the digital world is actually entirely dependent on a very heavy, incredibly loud, and honestly violently hot physical foundation.
Which is exactly why we're doing this today. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. I'm your host, Jack.
And I'm Misha, and we are here to unpack the physical realities of the internet for you.
Because it operates completely out of sight.
Right.
But it consumes just staggering amounts of electricity.
Oh, massive amounts.
Right.
And it generates temperatures that would literally melt standard computing equipment. The sheer physical footprint of AI is honestly one of the most overlooked parts of this whole tech boom.
Which is why we're focusing squarely on the heavy metal foundation today. The power, the cooling, and the massive physical infrastructure that keeps the internet from, well, combusting.
Yeah, combusting is a good word for it. Our guide for this conversation is the 2025 annual report from a company called Vertiv.
Right. And their corporate tagline is literally, "The world depends on data we power and cool."
And looking at their numbers, I mean, they are not exaggerating in the slightest. They have positioned themselves right at the structural center of the AI revolution.
Yeah, so when you dive into their data, you aren't just looking at some parts manufacturer. You're looking at the foundational architecture that allows companies like NVIDIA and Microsoft to even function.
Exactly. They push the boundaries of what computing can physically handle.
So we're going to break down exactly what Vertiv sells, right?
Yeah.
And how their deeply integrated business model has allowed them to capture an unprecedented $15 billion backlog of orders.
Which is just a wild number.
It's insane. And perhaps most importantly, for anyone following the markets, we're going to look at how their profitability absolutely exploded between 2024 and 2025.
But to understand the sheer scale of those financial numbers, you really have to understand the physical reality of the problem they're solving first.
Right, because as we established, the cloud is actually a massive physical building.
Yes, exactly. A building filled with rows and rows of incredibly densely packed servers.
And those servers need power. And here is where the physics of the situation basically becomes the main character.
Oh, for sure. When a standard processor runs basic code, it generates heat. We all know that.
Yeah, your laptop gets hot.
Right. But an AI chip doing thousands of complex matrix multiplications simultaneously, it draws an immense amount of power.
And thermodynamics dictates that essentially all of that electrical power is ultimately converted into heat.
Which creates a catastrophic thermal environment. I mean, imagine cramming 1,000 high-end, overclocked gaming PCs into a space the size of a phone booth.
Wow.
The heat generated isn't just uncomfortable, it is physically destructive. Traditional air conditioning is like trying to cool down a volcano by blowing on it. It just does not work at these new densities.
So what exactly does Vertiv provide to stop the meltdown?
It's a massive list, but it really all comes down to controlling electricity and heat.
Right. They offer alternating current and direct current power management. They build thermal management systems.
Which bridges the gap between traditional massive air chillers and highly advanced liquid cooling setups, right?
Exactly. And they manufacture low and medium voltage switchgear, uninterruptible power supplies, and something called busbar systems.
Let's actually define that term for the listener, because I think it highlights the scale we're dealing with. A busbar is not a wire.
No, not at all. When you are moving megawatts of power into a server room, traditional cables would have to be impossibly thick.
And they'd be incredibly dangerous.
Super dangerous.
Yeah.
So a busbar is essentially a heavy-duty, solid metallic spine, usually made of copper or aluminum, that conducts massive amounts of electricity safely across the facility. And Vertiv builds these electrical spines. Plus, they build the physical, reinforced racks that hold the servers themselves, and the software that oversees all of this hardware in real time.
Yeah, they really do it all.
I was trying to visualize what this means for you, the listener, and the best way to think about it is like the cardiovascular system of a high-performance athlete.
I like that analogy.
Right. Because everyone looks at the brain, the incredibly expensive AI chips. But without the cooling system pumping fluids, the heavy-duty power lines acting as arteries, and the structural skeleton.
The brain dies.
Exactly. Without all of that supporting infrastructure, that million-dollar brain dies in seconds. It just overheats and seizes up. Vertiv is building the cardiovascular system for the AI revolution.
And the customers buying these systems fall into a few massive categories. First, you have the data centers.
So like the giant hyperscale facilities run by big tech monopolies.
Right, and colocation facilities where smaller companies rent server space, plus private enterprise data centers.
You also have those emerging neo-cloud providers, those startups specifically building specialized AI infrastructure.
Yeah, and beyond traditional tech communication networks and heavy commercial sectors like advanced manufacturing or oil and gas, they're massive buyers too.
Because they increasingly require localized heavy-duty computing power right on their physical sites.
Exactly. So it's an incredibly diverse customer base, but every single one of them shares the exact same physical bottleneck: heat and power.
And the scale of what these customers demand is shifting radically, isn't it?
Oh, completely. We aren't talking about buyers purchasing a few air conditioning units for a server closet anymore. These customers are planning multi-year gigawatt-scale deployments.
And the annual report really emphasizes that they need infrastructure that scales fast, runs hard, and never blinks.
Yeah, that never blinks standard is the core of the industry. In a hyperscale AI data center, downtime isn't measured in inconvenience. It is measured in millions of dollars of lost revenue.
And lost computed time per minute. Reliability has to be absolute.
Which is exactly why they've locked themselves in as the architect of these massive environments. They aren't fighting over pennies with generic parts suppliers.
And when you eliminate that price war, something fascinating happens to your bottom line, which brings us to their business model.
Right, because historically, physical hardware can quickly become a race to the bottom on price.
Yeah, someone else figures out how to bend the sheet metal cheaper or, source copper for less, and suddenly your margins just evaporate.
So how does Vertiv avoid being commoditized? By entirely shifting the premise of what they sell.
Right. They move from selling individual pieces of hardware to selling a deeply integrated, highly sticky ecosystem.
They aren't a parts catalog that you just flip through.
Let's look at how they actually go to market. They employ around 3,000 direct salespeople globally, alongside a huge network of channel partners.
But the real secret sauce, the thing that makes them indispensable to a facility manager, is their services division.
Yeah, they operate over 320 service centers worldwide, with roughly 5,000 field service engineers.
They're selling entire lifecycle services, preventative maintenance, 204/7 remote monitoring, and highly specialized fluid management for these new liquid cooling systems.
That service network acts as a massive competitive moat. I mean, think about it from the perspective of a tech giant building a billion-dollar AI data center.
You don't just need the physical equipment. You need the absolute guarantee that if a thermal anomaly is detected at 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday, an engineer is already en route.
Or better yet, that their proprietary predictive analytics software caught the pressure drop in the cooling line weeks before it ever became a problem.
Exactly.
I hear that. But I want to push back on this for a second.
Okay, sure.
Because if you're one of the biggest tech companies in the world, you have essentially unlimited financial resources.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just buy the absolute cheapest industrial AC units, source generic power switches from overseas, and just pay your own engineering teams to wire it up?
That's a fair question. But if we step back and look at the physics of next-generation computing, that piecemeal approach is simply impossible now.
Really?
Impossible.
Yeah, at the extreme power densities required by AI, you cannot optimize components in isolation. You can't just point a bigger fan at a hotter chip.
I see.
If you buy a generic power supply and a generic cooling system, they don't talk to each other. When the AI chip suddenly demands a massive spike in power, the cooling system needs to ramp up microseconds in advance.
Not after the room is already overheating.
Exactly. Vertiv's entire philosophy is system-level optimization.
So the infrastructure essentially operates as a single breathing organism.
That is the goal.
Yeah.
Power distribution, thermal management, and digital controls have to coordinate across the entire physical footprint of the facility.
What the industry calls the white space, where the servers actually sit, and the gray space, where the heavy power equipment lives.
Right. To solve this, Vertiv sells pre-engineered, prefabricated infrastructure. They have flagship solutions called Vertiv Smart Run and Vertiv One Core. These are complete converged architectures, right? Where power, cooling, and controls are manufactured to function as one unified block.
So for the buyer, they aren't just getting better performance, they're buying speed.
Yeah.
I don't have to spend a year figuring out how to make different brands of equipment play nicely together.
It's speed and certainty. And to ensure they stay ahead of the curve, they actively co-develop with the chip makers themselves.
Yeah, Vertiv collaborates directly with ecosystem leaders like NVIDIA. They aren't just waiting to see what the next chip requires.
They are engaged in early architectural alignment. A prime example is their work pioneering infrastructure for 800-volt direct current power architectures.
Let's unpack why 800 volts is such a big deal for you, the listener. It comes back to basic electrical physics.
Right. When you double the voltage in a system, you essentially have the electrical current needed to deliver the same amount of total power.
And less current means you can use physically thinner cables.
And crucially, those cables generate significantly less of their own heat.
So by co-developing an 800-volt infrastructure directly alongside the silicon designers, Vertiv ensures that when a massive new chip platform is announced, they already have the deployable plumbing ready to handle it.
They are literally designing the building around the chip of the future.
Exactly. And because they've successfully embedded themselves as this irreplaceable system-level partner, that positioning has translated into an absolute tidal wave of revenue and profit.
Let's look at the financial realities of 2024 and 2025, because this is where the story shifts from engineering to massive wealth generation.
We need to set the baseline first. In 2023, Vertiv was already a major player. They reported $6.86 billion in net sales.
And their adjusted operating profit was a solid $1.05 billion, right?
Right, giving them a healthy margin of 15.3%. Net income sat at $460.2 million.
Then in 2024, the AI narrative really took hold of the global market. Sales climbed to $8.01 billion.
Adjusted operating profit rose to $1.5 billion, and their margins expanded to 19.4%. Net income ticked up to $495.8 million.
So you have a picture of steady, strong growth as the industry geared up. But the leap from 2024 to 2025 is not steady growth.
No, it is a paradigm-shifting financial explosion.
In 2025, net sales shattered all previous records, hitting $10.2 billion. That is a massive 28% year-over-year increase from 2024.
But top-line revenue is just vanity, really. The profitability is the real story here.
Yeah, net income leaped from that roughly $495 million in 2024 to an astounding $1.33 billion in 2025.
That is nearly a tripling of net income in a single 12-month period for a company dealing in physical, heavy industrial hardware. It's wild.
Diluted earnings per share hit $3.41, which is 166% growth compared to 2024. And their adjusted operating margins broke the 20% barrier to hit 20.4%.
When you hear about a $1.33 billion net income, it's easy to just see a number on a page. But think about what that means in reality.
Right. Every time a new AI tool is deployed, every time a new language model is trained, it sends a thermal shockwave through these facilities.
And Vertiv captures the value of managing that shockwave.
So how did they pull off this jump? Did they just suddenly start charging double for the exact same equipment?
Well, they did maintain strong pricing power, sure, but the primary driver was a staggering increase in sheer volume. Product sales alone increased by almost $2 billion in 2025.
Wow. And the demand was global, but the Americas region was the epicenter, right? Posting an almost 42% increase in sales in 1 year.
Almost 42% growth in their biggest, most mature market. It's incredible.
But to truly understand why profits exploded so much faster than revenue, we have to look at a financial concept called operational leverage.
Yeah, when a company has high operational leverage, it means they have a high proportion of fixed costs compared to variable costs.
Think of it like building a massive state-of-the-art factory. To build the very first advanced cooling system, you have to pay for the building, the robotic assembly lines, the R&D engineers, and huge administrative overhead.
Exactly. That first cooling unit is incredibly expensive.
But to build the 1,000th cooling system, your factory is already paid for. In 2023 and 2024, they were optimizing the factory. In 2025, they were just pumping out the systems at maximum capacity.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. If you look at their selling, general, and administrative expenses, their SG&A, the raw dollar amount naturally went up in 2025 because they're growing and paying their massive workforce.
Right. But as a percentage of total sales, SG&A actually dropped.
Yes. It fell from 17.1% of sales in 2024 down to 15.8% in 2025.
Because the sales volume surged so violently upward, the fixed costs essentially got diluted across a wider base.
Exactly. Every extra dollar of sales they generated essentially tumbled straight past the operational costs and landed right in their profit column.
The sheer velocity of their sales volume, combined with their ability to hold firm on their pricing, just allowed profits to multiply.
And this is vital to note. They achieved this massive profitability despite facing significant macroeconomic headwinds in 2025.
Right. They were dealing with raw material cost inflation and the impact of shifting global tariffs on their supply chain.
They literally outran inflation with sheer volume and operational efficiency.
Generating over $1 billion in profit is an incredible feat, but an income statement is ultimately an accounting document. You cannot run a global supply chain, build new factories, or acquire competitors with paper profits.
No, you need physical cash.
Which brings us to the operational reality of how Vertiv is deploying its resources to stay ahead of this relentless market demand.
And their cash flow statement is arguably even more impressive than the income statement. In 2025, their operating cash flow hit a massive $2.1 billion.
To put the speed of that growth in perspective, that is an increase of nearly $800 million compared to their cash generation just a year prior.
Adjusted free cash flow sat at a robust $1.9 billion.
What immediately stands out to me when looking at these sources is that Vertiv didn't just sit on this cash. They didn't hoard it in a treasury account to play it safe.
And they didn't just strip the company to pay it all out in dividends to shareholders either.
No, they aggressively deployed it. The financials show they used $1.5 billion in investing activities. They're quite literally using their 2023 cash to buy capacity, and more importantly, they are buying time.
Because they recognize a fundamental truth about the current infrastructure landscape. Execution capability is just as critical as the technology itself.
Yeah, you might engineer the most thermodynamically perfect cooling system in the world, but if your supply chain is bottlenecked and you can't deliver it for 3 years,
The hyperscalers will just give the contract to someone else. Vertiv is investing heavily to ensure they are never the bottleneck.
so where exactly is that $1.5 billion going?
Well, first, they are heavily funding internal engineering, research, and development. That R&D spend grew 20% in 2025 to $441.7 million.
And they anticipate growing at another 20% or more as we move into 2026.
Right. They are funding foundational, system-level innovation to solve the thermodynamics of tomorrow's chips. But beyond internal R&D, they went on a highly targeted acquisition spree.
Let's run through these acquisitions because each one represents a specific piece of the AI puzzle. The first major move was acquiring a company called Great Lakes for roughly $200 million.
And Great Lakes specializes in highly customized, heavy-duty racks and cabinets for the data center white space.
Remember, if you are selling a fully integrated, prefabricated system like we discussed earlier, you need total end-to-end control over the physical metal racks that the servers actually sit in.
Exactly. They bought their own supply chain for the physical skeletons.
Then they acquired a company called Waylay. This is entirely a software play, specifically designed to strengthen the digital layer of their services division.
Right, Waylay brings advanced AI-enabled monitoring and predictive maintenance software. So Vertiv is utilizing artificial intelligence to monitor and protect the physical infrastructure that runs artificial intelligence.
It's the ultimate feedback loop. And the third key acquisition was a company called Pergerite. This one is vital to understand because it focuses on the thermal management side.
Yeah, Pergerite strengthens Vertiv's capabilities in specialized fluid management. We mentioned the shift from air cooling to liquid cooling earlier.
And liquid cooling isn't just running a garden hose full of water through a server room.
Definitely not. It involves complex networks of specialized dielectric fluids, fluids that don't conduct electricity.
Because obviously water and servers don't mix.
Right. These fluids are being pumped directly over the silicon or entirely submerging the servers. It requires precise flow rates, highly sensitive leak detection, and microscopic filtration.
So Pergerite gives Vertiv specialized expertise to manage the long-term reliability of these complex thermal networks.
Exactly. So they bought the physical rack capacity, the predictive AI software, and the fluid management expertise. It's an incredibly strategic deployment of their cash.
But, even with all of these acquisitions, there is a looming industry-wide bottleneck that even Vertiv's most advanced equipment cannot solve in isolation.
The power grid itself.
Yeah, the grid. This is the single biggest constraint threatening the entire AI industry globally right now. Sheer power availability.
You can build a state-of-the-art liquid-cooled data center filled with billions of dollars of NVIDIA chips, but if the local utility company tells you it'll take 5 to 7 years to upgrade the transmission lines,
Your facility is effectively just a very expensive brick.
basically, yeah.
This is where Vertiv's massive cash generation allows them to be truly forward-thinking. They aren't just waiting for the utility companies to figure it out.
No, they partnered with Caterpillar, specifically their solar turbines division. I read through this part of the report, and it is honestly fascinating.
Together, they're developing pre-designed, integrated architectures that combine Caterpillar's massive on-site power generation capabilities with Vertiv's power and thermal management systems.
They are enabling gigawatt-scale AI infrastructure that is completely independent of traditional utility grid constraints.
And to understand what a gigawatt is, we are talking about the power output equivalent of a standard commercial nuclear reactor.
Just massive. By combining localized generation with Vertiv's management, they are compressing deployment timelines from years down to months.
They're essentially helping their customers build their own private power plants so that they can sell them the data center gear to go inside.
Which is brilliant. And looking even further ahead, as power density demands continue to surge, Vertiv has partnered with an innovative clean energy company called Oklo.
Right. They're co-developing advanced power and thermal solutions that would be powered directly by the steam and electricity generated from Oklo's micronuclear power plants.
Nuclear-powered data centers. It really highlights the absolute extreme scale of the energy challenge we're dealing with.
Vertiv is utilizing the massive profits and cash flow generated in 2025 to actively solve the severe power grid constraints that the industry is going to face in 2030.
It is a masterclass in long-term strategic vision, supported by flawless short-term execution.
What we've uncovered today is the story of how a company took a foundational and, let's be honest, somewhat unglamorous industrial necessity, heavy-duty power and cooling, and engineered it into an integrated $10.2 billion technological juggernaut.
Yeah, they secured a $15 billion backlog, not by just bending metal and selling parts, but by building a unified, system-level architecture that the biggest tech monopolies in the world simply cannot function without.
Vertiv has proven that the physical heavy metal constraints of AI are just as lucrative, if not more so, than the software running on top of it.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a final perspective to mull over as you watch the AI boom unfold.
Yeah.
We as a society constantly obsess over when artificial intelligence will achieve human-level reasoning, assuming it is purely a software puzzle. We wait for the next algorithm breakthrough or the next line of revolutionary code.
Right.
But looking at the trajectory of companies like Vertiv reveals a very different physical reality. The ultimate limit to human innovation over the next decade will not be written in code. It will be dictated by thermodynamics, fluid dynamics, and raw electrical grid capacity.
Wow.
The true gatekeepers of our digital future might not be the software developers in Silicon Valley. They might actually be the thermal and power engineers.
That is wild to think about. The next time you use an AI tool, remember the physical heat it takes to generate that answer. Thank you for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive. We'll catch you next time.